Hey everybody, before we start the show, I wanted to tell you about one of our sponsors, Kobold Press. Kobold Press is one of my favorite third-party design companies. They make all kinds of great RPG products. I'm talking for Pathfinder, 13th Age, D&D. You might know the Tome of Beasts, Deep Magic, the Midgard campaign setting. These are all things to come out of the Kobold Press offices, which are, of course, run by Kobold-in-Chief and frequent guest of this program, Wolfgang Bauer. Well, right now, Kobold Press has a new project called Warlock. It is a Patreon-supported project. With your support, the Kobolds can make new 5th edition D&D Midgard material on a regular, ongoing basis. That's right, a magazine for Midgard. It is going to be amazing because you'll have access to new maps, new monsters, new 5e character options, and so much more. I am a patron of Warlock, and you should become one too. You're going to get tons of great content from top-tier designers. Check it out at patreon.com/koboldpress. That's patreon.com/koboldpress. This is Tabletop Babble. I'm James Introcaso. This week on the show, I'm talking with Max from Reading the Realms, Jeff Greiner from the Tome Show, and Ginny Loveday, a frequent organized play organizer, who are going to talk to us all about the Forgotten Realms. The Forgotten Realms is an amazing campaign setting that many D&D 5th edition adventures take place in. In fact, all of the hardcover adventures, except for Curse of Strahd, take place in the Forgotten Realms. Let's dive deep into what the realms are and how we can make great adventures and great characters in that campaign setting. Here's my conversation with them. Okay, everybody, now I'm here with 3 amazing Realms fans. With me, of course, I could not do this podcast in many senses, but specifically this Realms podcast without Jeff Greiner. Jeff Greiner, who are you and what do you do in the world of tabletop RPGs, as if our audience doesn't already know?
I am Jeff Greiner, and I find podcasting talent and give them platforms with which to launch their own podcasting career. I do so over at thetomeshow.com.
Yes, excellent. I worked with Jeff for many years over on the Tome Show before starting Don't Split the Podcast Network. And
is this my first appearance on the show?
Your first appearance.
Wow.
Although I will mention to our listeners, not your first invite. Not your first invite. You are a busy dude with a podcast empire of your own. There
was one invite where I said yes, and then I don't think anybody else said anything. So
yes, it just sort of crumbled. The secrets of podcasting, right?
So if you ever want to get that one going again, I'm ready. I already have my favorite adventure ready to go.
Yeah, we should do that one again. So that's going to be a Tome Show reunion. Of course, you have Tome Show reunions regularly as well. It's called the Tome Show Podcast. Check it out. It is an amazing podcast. If you like Tabletop Babble, you will love the Tome Show. And then also with me is Ginny Loveday. Ginny, welcome back. Who are you and what do you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games?
I work with the D&D Adventures League. Used to be in a more official volunteer position, not so much anymore, but I'm still doing exactly what I did do. Down in the Southeast region. Organizing people, herding cats, writing my first adventure right now, helping other people write adventures. I'm now connecting writers with conventions for the convention-created content. And I do editing. If anybody needs any editing done, I feel like I can say that now because Jeff Stevens has talked to me. So I think that means I made it.
Awesome. Well, it's great to have you here. So then with us is another Tabletop Babble newbie, having never appeared on the Round Show, I can say with confidence, is Max. Max, who are you and what do you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games?
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I've never been on either of those shows, although I'm a huge fan of both of them. I run a little podcast called Reading the Realms, and we're a Forgotten Realms book club podcast. And the kind of short and long of it is we are reading all of the novels written for the Forgotten Realms in publication order. So, no big deal. No small task or anything.
The Tome Show book club started off with a lot of Forgotten Realms stuff, and then I think I was driving everybody else crazy, so they forced me to branch out.
Yeah, we'll see how quickly we kind of lose our collective minds over there.
Good for you.
Yeah, that is pretty incredible. I look forward to your Dragonlance spin-off podcast when that arrives. That'll be pretty great as well.
I'm going to listen to that.
But so let's talk about the realms. The realms are an old D&D campaign setting that still thrives today. I'm sure a lot of people know what the Forgotten Realms are kind of in broad strokes, in that it is a Dungeons & Dragons campaign setting. There were many novels that took place in the realms, that right now many seasons of the Adventurers League and most of the hardcover story arcs took place in the realms, with the exception, of course, of The Curse of Strahd, which takes place in Barovia, that have been put out for 5th edition so far. And then there's many old adventures. The realms have been around since the 80s, is that right?
That's a fairly Realms geeky question itself. And
that is true. That is true. Some say the realms existed before D&D itself, right?
In fact, the realms have existed since before D&D. Ed Greenwood came up with the realms when he was, I think the story is when he was like 7 years old. He started writing stories in the realms, and that was long before D&D was a thing. But it has been a D&D setting since the 80s, sounds right-ish.
I believe like 86, 87, yeah.
87, and he started writing it in 67.
Yes, yeah. So it's been around. This is actually, we can say, right, this is the 30th anniversary of the realms as a campaign setting. If 87 is when it came out. So that's pretty cool and exciting. And it is an enormous setting, right? So what are the Forgotten Realms then? Obviously, we've got this very broad strokes. We know it's a campaign setting. We know it's been around for a long time. But what are the Forgotten Realms? What makes it different from other campaign settings? And specifically, what makes it different from Greyhawk, another old campaign setting that I feel like whenever I ask people, they're like, oh, Forgotten Realms and Greyhawk are the same thing, just everything's has different gods, but the same sort of pantheon, different cities, but the same kind of cities, high fantasy, high magic. One belonged to Gary Gygax and one belongs to Ed Greenwood, and that's kind of how we differentiate them. Jeff Greiner, would you say that is true?
Oh, jeez. You start with me, great. So you actually emailed us this question ahead of time, and my thought was, I don't know that I'm qualified to answer in as much as I know the realms pretty well, and I know almost nothing about Greyhawk other than a little bit when it was the core setting during third. I do know that I would put them within the same genre of setting in terms of high fantasy, high magic sort of a setting. Pantheons of gods and what have you. Now, there's a lot of difference in the detail, right? It's like saying that two rock albums are in the same genre. Well, that's true, but they're very different songs with different musicians, right? That's the gist of it for me, right? If nothing else, the Realms is a lot more granular. It has a lot more detail, a lot more history, right? A lot more has been published in the Realms than has been published in Greyhawk, which is both, for some people, it's bane and it's boon, right? People love the granularity and the continuity and all the stories, but people also become overwhelmed by that sometimes.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think sometimes when a setting has a super duper rich history and has you look at the map of the Sword Coast and it's like, hey, this isn't even all of it, right? This is only a part of the realms. I do think that can be very intimidating, especially when you're dealing with a world that has canon, and it's like, oh, well, my players might know more about this world's canon than I do. What about you? What do you think, Max? Do you think there is a difference between the realms and Greyhawk, and also sort of overall what defines the realms for you?
Well, I think the listeners are probably going to roll their eyes when I admit that I actually don't have a lot of experience with Greyhawk either. But it's my understanding that Greyhawk is really kind of a little bit darker fantasy, maybe. I know there's still a lot of gods and a lot of magic, and, the history of the world goes back however many eons. But my limited knowledge of Greyhawk is just a little bit darker. But to just go off of something that Jeff said there, I think one of the hallmarks of any good campaign setting, whether it's Greyhawk I have a lot of more experience with the realms, that although there is a ton of history and a ton of backstory and lore and everything, it's still D&D. So I've heard plenty of good games set in the realms where they just ignored whole swaths of history and backstory, and they were still super interesting and super great. It's one of those campaigns where the DM is entirely capable, and I hope encouraged to really make it their own, and not just try to plumb the mind of Ed Greenwood at every turn.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Same way if you were going to run an adventure in Middle-earth, right, you wouldn't feel like you would need to read the entire Silmarillion to run a campaign. You would hope that a game master would make it their own.
Well, and I think part of the issue is that a lot of the people who are really into Middle-earth would expect that they have read the entire Silmarillion before they run in Middle-earth. And that's the difference, right? Mm-hmm. If you want to run in Middle-earth, there's a handful of really detailed books that you need to go into. If you want to tell a story in the realms and you're going to traverse all over the world, like, there is a metric ton more books to read than there is for Middle-earth, right? Mm-hmm. And that's why people feel like it's daunting, I think. And if we want to get into it at some point, there's all kinds of advice about how to deal with that. So
absolutely, and we definitely should talk about that. But before we get to it, I do want to ask Ginny,
yes,
who is now a permanent part of Forgotten Realms lore, I think it's safe to say, right, Ginny? What do the realms mean to you? How is it different from other campaign settings? And if you are brave enough, how is it different from Greyhawk?
Technically, it's not part of canon yet that my tiefling is part of the lore, but I'm campaigning for her campaign to be official. One time when me reading everything comes in handy. I do know a bit about Greyhawk.
Nice.
So Greyhawk has it's a lot less overwhelming. There's a lot less to it. But Greyhawk, at its core, has a central story. Like, the whole setting has one central story. Forgotten Realms does not, as Max would say. It has millions of stories. Just real quick, a little backstory. Greyhawk basically is these two empires that were seemingly locked in eternal war, and then they kind of destroyed each other, right? And then most of what people are playing in Greyhawk is like the aftermath of that. It's in a period of breakup and decline. So I would agree that it is essentially a much darker setting than the Forgotten Realms is, at least on surface. Like, you can make Forgotten Realms dark. You can make Forgotten Realms whatever you want. That's the beauty of it. But, Greyhawk is much more what you want to make out of it. You've got that central story, and that kind of sets the tone for the setting, but then you can kind of go anywhere you want. Now, in the Forgotten Realms, there's no central story, so like, you can be down in Shar, over in Chult, up in the Savage Frontier, over on the Sea of Falling Stars, wherever it is that you want to be. And those places are, far apart, very far apart for anyone who's not familiar with the realms, because it is, as you said, huge. But I mean, what I like about the realms is most of the lore that we have in the realms, if you're playing in 5th edition, is ancient history. So you can really just ignore a lot of it if it's overwhelming.
Yes, that is true. And you sort of have these different ages within the Forgotten Realms you could choose to play in, which I think we'll also get into a little bit later, right? If you like a certain period of Realms lore, you could play your game in that period of Realms lore if you so choose to, which is also pretty cool. Like, if you want to play before the Spell Plague happened or during the Spell Plague, you've got those options.
Before the fall of Myth Draenor.
Exactly. And so the realms, I think that's a good thing, because we're talking about how you manage all of this information and what the realms are. And one of the things about the realms that I find really daunting, in addition to its rich backstory and all of these little settings, and part of the reason the realms is like this is Ed Greenwood wanted to create a place where he could tell lots of different stories, right? And so that's why it's so big and so diverse. I think it's also you get into things like, this is a place where you could play an adventure like Tomb of Annihilation, where you're in the jungles, very pulpy, big action. You could be riding along the Sword Coast, taking care of pirate ships or stopping Tiamat from rising through the earth. You could be in the city of Waterdeep having an intrigue-style adventure. You could be in Icewind Dale fighting frost giants. Like, you could be all over the place with this thing. The realms are huge, absolutely huge. So let's talk a little bit about how big they are and how do we manage not just the vastness of the history, but also just the entire huge, large map. How do you handle those things? And Jeff, I'm going to start with you again, because this one I know you've run
I can talk about
giant campaign in the Realms during 4th edition.
And that wasn't my only Realms campaign in my time as a gamer either. The Realms is large and it is really diverse. On one hand, though, I would argue it's less diverse than the real world. So if you can navigate your life in the real world, the Realms shouldn't be more complicated than that. In fact, when the Realms were first created, the concept was that they were forgotten realms because they used to be part of our world and they have since been forgotten, right? They've gone off to this other place and whatever. And so you have this sort of Egypt analog, and you have this France analog, and you have this, the jungles of the Congo, and everything is sort of originally was representative of a real world sort of cultural geographic region. It has since, of course, over 3 decades evolved and become sort of independent in their own thing in a lot of ways. But you can still see a lot of that coming out. And so I would argue, I guess my advice is don't worry about understanding all of the vast diversity of the realms, because you don't need to understand all of it. Just try to understand the culture or the region that you're dealing with, right? And that's part of your story. And understand it as much as you want to understand it. And it's also worth noting that the realms, while being huge, the Forgotten Realms technically is not the whole planet. The whole planet is called Toril, and it contains multiple settings, of which the Forgotten Realms is the most popular. But there's other settings within the same planet as well. And so you could even traverse from the Forgotten Realms over to Mazteca or Al-Qadim or whatever, right? There's all these other things going on there too. So there's a lot that you could get really complicated. So my advice is don't do that, right? Unless you feel really passionate about it, and if you do move from sort of region to region, that's fine. But you only really need to dive into 1 or 2 things at a time, and not worry about understanding the bulk of it at once.
Sure. And I think that's great advice for any enormous campaign setting. Eberron is not necessarily doesn't have the history that the Realms does, but does have a lot of places you can go. And you don't need to understand all of Eberron before you jump into an Eberron campaign.
Well, and I would argue that even though the Realms does have that history, and Ginny sort of alluded to this, is that I'm a big fan of ignoring as much of it as you want to, right? Look to that history when you're looking for sources of inspiration, but you don't need to know the breadth of it. Like, you're going into those ruins, hey, it'd be kind of cool to look through the history of the Realms and see what I could justify those ruins being from. And if I find something cool. If I don't, whatever, make something up. One of the things about running in the Realms is that I'm a big proponent of making them your realms, not the canon realms. Find inspiration from the canon, but don't feel slaved to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Max, you're jumping into this giant canon on your podcast. What do you think about the Realms and running a game in the Realms? How do you manage the scope? How do you manage the history? What would be your way of doing that?
Well, actually, I think probably the best advice from that is comes from the creator of the Forgotten Realms himself, Ed Greenwood. I read in doing research for the podcast that, and he said this probably multiple places and multiple times, but when you're world building, you don't create the entire continent and then every single city and then every single town and river and mountain range. You start from where the party is and then you build it out from there. And you hear that from you hear that from Greenwood, you hear that from someone like China Mieville with his world building. All these really intelligent guys and I'm sure women too who create these incredible fantasy worlds. And they say, start from the place that you're in, the place that you're interested in, and then go from there. And I think that's, in terms of when you're even just playing a game in the Realms, if you're in Waterdeep. Just there's so much to do just in Waterdeep. You could do a whole campaign in there, but you don't have to bounce from Waterdeep to Evermeet up to Icewind Dale down to Chult. You could. There's so many continents and cities and just so many places in the realms. Like you can make it as small or as big as you really want to.
Mm-hmm. And even if you do want to go big, you just got to be 1 week ahead of your players, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's a trick from a teacher, by the way. Take that.
Yeah.
You just got to be one step ahead of everybody else.
Yeah, that is definitely true. That is so true. In running any campaign, again, I ran an Eberron campaign for a long time. There was a lot to mine there, and it was just like, okay, just know what's happening this week, and you're good to go.
I will just add from just a kind of a storytelling point of view, because that's where I kind of come from with, having to read all these books. Oftentimes it's not the story, the narrative that you're telling the players. It's not, the places that they're in, as much history as they might have. It's the characters that they meet and the characters that they're playing when they're there. That's what gives the realms life. That's why we know all these characters like Elminster and Alondo and Blackstaff and Drizzt, obviously, all of these characters that we know and love. That's what gives the realms its character and its meaning to a lot of people.
You forgot Volo.
Ginny, what about you? What do you do? You've run a fair amount of realms stuff yourself. How do you not get lost in the weeds of it all?
I'm not going to lie, organized play makes it really easy, in that we've carved out a very small section, which is still pretty large, and been like, we're just going to look at this bit of the map. As far as if you're running in 5th edition organized play, we're on the Sword Coast.
Mm-hmm.
And the Sword Coast, it's big, but it's a very small portion of Toril. I have a map. It's actually a scarf. It's fairly large, and it doesn't even have all of the Sword Coast on it. So it's a huge area. So if we weren't constricted to a small area of the realms, I probably would not cope nearly as well as I do. I just want to be honest. Geography on a map and explaining it out loud are difficult. So I can see how it's overwhelming. I've definitely told my players we're going south from Waterdeep to Neverwinter once. I did. I felt ashamed.
Which for the listeners is the wrong direction. Neverwinter is to the north.
Complete opposite direction. I got shamed after my game. 2 of my players said, "No, that's north."
Well, and I think I think this brings up some really good stuff. Talking about starting small, making the realms your own, I think is a really, really huge point. Talking about how in different time periods, some history is so old it doesn't even matter, right? I think is a really good point of you don't need to worry that much about what happened 1,000 years ago in the realms just because somebody wrote down what happened 1,000 years ago, and because you're free to change it and make it your own, right?
Yeah, I was saying, or it matters exactly as much as you want it to. Because if you happen to be looking for some sort of inspiration of how to decorate this dungeon or whatever, right? And you find some lore that says, "Oh, cool, serpent people, I'm going to do something with that," right? Then do that, right? Because there's lore there to use, and that's what it's good for. It's not good for constricting your creativity. It's good for inspiring you to come up with new ideas.
You've been reading what I'm working on.
I have Which snake people are you dealing with?
The ones with serpentine appearances.
The snake people that look like serpents. Okay, interesting. Yeah.
I think that's such a great point, though. One thing I would say is a good idea is for people to sort of look at some of the hardcover adventures that take place in the realms and see how much actual information they give the DM. Because usually it's just what you need to run the adventure, right? They don't get into necessarily the entire backstory of certain places you go. For instance, in Tyranny of Dragons, that storyline, you are all over the Sword Coast, right? And they're not giving you the entire history of Waterdeep when you go to the Council of Waterdeep in Rise of Tiamat. They're saying, this is what you need to know about Waterdeep right now to run this adventure, and that's it. And I think giving yourself that and letting that inspire you is really, really smart. Hey, we're just going to take a quick break to hear about 2C Gaming, a small independent publisher that funds their projects through Kickstarter. 2C Gaming specializes in 5e and Pathfinder fantasy supplements, and right now they're in the middle of putting out an epic 6-part adventure. Part 3 of that adventure is The Lion's Vault, which is kickstarting right now. Each module in this storyline explores a different theme. The first adventure was a dungeon crawl with challenging puzzles and multi-stage boss encounters. The second adventure focused on intrigue, diplomacy, and forging alliances with multiple factions. This adventure, The Lion's Vault, focuses on disease and corruption with a powerful plague that has lasting consequences for the world. Parts 1 and 2 are available as part of the Kickstarter at the Everything tier, or you can go buy them at 2cgaming.com. This is available in both print and PDF. You get a digital deluxe version if you want it that includes a suite of tabletop resources that you can use with Roll20, Fantasy Grounds, or any other virtual tabletop. Head on over to Kickstarter and search for The Lion's Vault right now. You won't be sorry. It is going to be an amazing 5e adventure from 2C Gaming, or you can check it all out at 2cgaming.com. Remember to tell them that Don't Split the Podcast Network sent you. So, what do you all think makes a Realms adventure a Realms adventure? You know, Ginny, when you were talking about the difference between Gary Gygax is Greyhawk and Ed Greenwood's Realms, and Ed Greenwood's Realms being a little bit lighter. You know, Max, you mentioned this too, the Greyhawk being a little darker. I do think that also sort of represents well those two creators' different styles. You know, I think Gary Gygax, well, he certainly wrote some weird and wonderful out there stuff that was at times light. I think he bent a little bit more towards the dark. I think you see the OSR trying to recapture some of that old dark feel that he had in some of his adventures. Whereas if you've ever talked to Ed Greenwood, it's a little like talking to Santa Claus. The man is happy and joyful, right? And so what makes a Realms adventure a Realms adventure? Max, why don't we start with you? What do you think?
Gosh, you know, I don't have a ton of experience with D&D, but the majority of it that I have played has been in the Forgotten Realms. And so it's kind of hard for me to put my finger on exactly, other than to just say it just kind of feels like home. I don't know. It just feels good to be in the realms. You know, it's kind of that indefinable feeling. But as far as, you know, what makes it something just so specific to the realms, I don't know. I mean, there is just so much. We talked about it being kind of a double-edged sword. There's just so much detail to the world. But I mean, Ed Greenwood put out a book at the end of 4th edition that was basically just color. Really, it was just like tiny little bits of lore for different parts of the world. Like there is like all that baked in, just like more detail than you could ever possibly want, sort of thing. If it's there, if you want to pick it up and run with it, it feels like a living world. So yeah, I don't really know how to answer that other than to just say it just feels like a home, like a living world.
It's kind of like it's recognizable no matter like where you are. You feel like this feels like a D&D game.
Yeah, I totally agree. It does. It feels like a D&D game where you can play lots of different adventures. Jeff, what do you think makes a Realms adventure?
So I've talked about how you can ignore all the lore but go back to it for inspiration. If you want to make a story really feel like a Realm story, then make sure you're doing that, right? Go back and find that inspiration. Could you tell a generic D&D story in the Realms? Yes, I've seen many of them, right? And they feel like great D&D adventures. They don't feel like Realms adventures, right? There is a lot of lore, and you don't need to know all the lore, and you don't need to do all the research. But find your inspiration from the setting that's there, that you have available to you at your fingertips, and look for the inspiration from that. Be it the large pantheons of gods and the way they work with Eo the Overgod and the Tablets of Fate, or whether it's diving into a specific culture, you know, digging into the French nobility sort of aspect of Cormier, or you know the mercantile colonial aspects of Amn or what have you, right? There's all these sort of cultural touchstones. You know, I heard, I think it was Ginny said, anywhere, wherever you're at in the realms, it always feels like the realms. And I think that's an interesting thing to sort of try to wrap our heads around, because different parts of the realms feel really different to me. An adventure that I have in Cormier doesn't feel like an adventure that I have in Waterdeep, and it really doesn't feel like an adventure that I have down in the southeast, where we have Mulholland with the Egyptian theme and all that kind of stuff. Now, there are some threads that tie it together. The gods particularly have had a history of being particularly active in the world, and so they become sort of a glue that holds things together story-wise. I think you could tell non-realm story in the realms, but look for those sources of inspiration in the lore in order to really make it a realm story. Just little touchstones. It doesn't have to be a lot, but that this town is this. That you're when you're in the town of Shadowdale, you're at the Old Skull Inn, because that's an important touchstone that makes that part of the realms, right?
Do hard to pronounce or ridiculous names also make a realms adventure a realms adventure? Because they certainly make a realms novel a realms novel.
A little bit.
I don't know if they make a realms novel a realms novel, or if they make a Bob Salvatore novel a Bob Salvatore novel. Because a lot of the unpronounceable names of the realms, I think, came from Salvatore.
That is true. True. Ginny, what do you think? What makes a realms adventure a realms adventure?
So to me, it's a bit of both what Max said and what Jeff said. It's a lot that feeling of familiarity, whether you're playing in during the Spell Plague, or whether you're playing on the Sword Coast during current time, which is somewhere around 1490, unknown exactly. We're still arguing over what year we feel like it is. They're explicitly not telling us the year for 5th edition so far, so that we can be whenever we want, as well as wherever, which I find helpful. What makes it really, like you said, a Realms campaign or game to me is that lore. And it's so important that you have like that backstory available, even if you don't usually dive deep into it, that it is there, and you can pull on it, be like, why is this important? You can make something important to your characters because, because of their god, or because they used to be related to these people, or they were from Cormier, or from their, from Kalmshan, or wherever it is. And it's super important. I mean, we even had a whole person dedicated just to lore when we wrote the original, the Elmwood stuff. So, I mean, it's those little details that you can add in there to tie it all in that makes it, quintessentially realms.
Yeah, I think everybody's right? The devil is definitely in the details, and sort of the default D&D assumption has been, at least for the last several editions of the game, high magic worlds, right? High fantasy, high magic worlds. And that's what the realms is, which is why you're seeing so many adventures come out in the realms for this latest edition. Because I think in the minds of the creators, it seems like 5th edition is still in the younger part of its life. And so. They don't seem like they're in any rush to get to new settings, although they do keep teasing on Twitter now that new settings are coming and that sort of thing. So, but that's another podcast, definitely. We could probably talk for hours and hours about that. So what do PCs, what do our heroes in the realms look like then? This one's for the players, right? We give a lot of advice for DMs in this podcast, but let's talk about players. If you're creating a character for the realms, right? When I think about other campaign settings, a Dark Sun character, like I could conjure up different images for that. And so obviously it's a wide berth, like any campaign setting, because you want to allow the players freedom to create. But like, are there any sort of essential qualities that a player character in the realms needs to have? Ginny, let's start with you, because you have some player characters in the realms.
I do. To me, essential element player characters in the realm is that they are whatever you want them to be. I mean, there's a wide range of characters, monstrous races, everything available that you can play as. There are humans of all types, sorts, nationalities, personalities. You can be from, like he said, a France type area, an Egypt type area. So whatever human type personality you relate to, you could be that. So you could be your realms version of yourself, or you could be a tiefling. Why would you follow that if you could be a tiefling? No. Or you could be a bugbear, you could be a goblin, you can terrify the townsfolk, or you can blend in. It's whatever your imagination can bring to you in that. Yes, I have some player characters. I have an abundance of gnomes somehow.
We talked about diversity, and I think that is a big thing in the realms, particularly in the makeup of parties. It doesn't feel out of place to have a party with a lizard folk and a Goliath and 3 gnomes running around. That's the kind of thing you see not only in the realms, but reflected in some of its most popular literature, right? Bob Salvatore invented the Drow PC, essentially, and made it popular and now it's part of the player's handbook. Like, look at that. You can play a Drow right in the player's handbook in 5th edition.
It's amazing how long they held off on making that such a core element, considering that was literally like the second novel they ever published was Bob Salvatore.
Right. But it was supposed to be unique to Drizzt. Oh, yeah. So it is. I do think you're right. The ability to sort of create whatever you want and to have that work is in there. And I think there are some qualities that define that I'll get into, but perhaps Jeff or Max will address them. Jeff, what do you think? What makes a Realms PC a Realms PC?
Yeah, so I think that diversity piece is a big part of it. Now, some people will talk about the Realms as if it's a kitchen sink setting, and I don't think it's quite that. Like, if you want to tell a post-apocalyptic fantasy story, the Realms isn't necessarily the place to do that. Like, there are pockets where you can maybe kind of explore that kind of character, but there are settings designed for that, right? It is a really diverse setting, and so I recommend people make use of that diversity when they're considering their characters. What kind of character do you want to tell? You can probably get pretty close, if not right on, with the Realms, because there's just so much to build from, whether it's cultures or races or what have you, like Ginny had mentioned. Beyond that, what makes Realms characters, I guess there's a baseline assumption of, and then there's what's possible, all right? And those are different things. I think there's a baseline assumption of hope that exists in the Realms, that the characters are heroes because they are adventurers because they are heroes, and they are going out to make the world a better place as a baseline assumption. Now, there are absolutely exceptions, and you don't have to do that kind of game, but that seems to be pretty fundamental at the core of what the basics of the basic assumptions, I guess, of the Realms are. Whereas I don't know that would be true of a Dark Sun or even a Greyhawk, right? There's a lot of stories of Greyhawk adventurers who are going out to adventure in order to make their way in the world and get wealthy, it seems. And certainly you can tell that story with a Realms character, but that doesn't feel like the original sort of basic assumption. I think that's a pretty big deal too. And in a world with lots of things going on, there is this underlying thread of hope that never quite dies in the world.
Yeah, and I think that's what helps make the diversity work, right? It's sort of an all hands kind of thing. Like, if you're a hero, if you are heroic, no matter what your motivation might very well be to get rich, right? But you're still performing often good deeds to do that. Ginny, I remember a while back when we were talking about Storm King's Thunder, you said you were glad because you didn't want to be in Barovia anymore.
Oh, God.
Which is why I feel like the Realms are I do feel like the Realms, like Jeff said, have this thread of hope, have this thread of joy and adventuring, too, throughout them that I think
opportunity.
Yes, yeah. I think that's exhibited in the novels. Do you get that at all, Max? This thread of sort of heroics being a thing that can be fun and are meant for good and that sort of thing? And do you think that is a quality a lot of Realms player characters have?
Oh, yeah, I think for sure, absolutely. I mean, what you said about Barovia, Ravenloft does one thing, and it does it very well, but hope is definitely not it. I mean, I was I was running a game for Curse of Strahd, and one of my player characters just got so bored and so despondent over the party situation, he just walked off into the mist. He just unapologetically said, nope, screw it, I'm done. But yeah, I mean, the Realms really just offers that such a more vast variety of experiences that your players can have. And just going back to what you said a minute ago about the books, I think it was Jeff, originally, because I've been going back and reading a lot of those early novels, there was not this diversity of characters in the original books. I mean, they were all very much centered around mostly human parties. That's why Drizzt was such a standout character in that second novel, because he was so different. And that's what made him interesting, right? Because, going back and reading these books, it's like the most interesting characters in them were not the human characters. They were the dwarves and the halflings, and then we kind of go out from there. But I think in terms of diversity, we're seeing it kind of D&D as a game is reflecting this wider push in society for diversity. I mean, in 4th edition, you had the like explosion of, you've now got Dragonborn and all these other really cool, interesting type of character races that you can play. And we see the kind of continued push for that in 5th edition. I mean, I think personally that's a really great thing. I think it's a reflection of where we are as a society.
Mm. Yeah, and I don't want to scare people off. There are lots of books with lots of details and things that help flesh out the setting in the world. Don't feel like you have to go out and read a bunch of novels though to make a character with a good realm sort of feel. If you pick up some of the brief sort of setting guides, the Sword Coast Adventures guide, or some of the players' guides that go along with some of the adventures, or even my favorite resource, which is the Forgotten Realms Wiki. You can pick up all kinds of little tidbits there. If you're kind of interested in, we're playing a game in Aglarond, let me look up some stuff about Aglarond. You will find 15 sources of inspiration from one page about Aglarond and be good to go.
If you're writing an adventure in the Forgotten Realms, Ginny, I'm sure you're about to caution this as well. Be careful with what you find in the Forgotten Realms wiki, if it's for the DM's Guild or anything like that, because it's not all up to date, not all true. But if you're doing something for your home campaign, who cares? If it inspires a great adventure, it inspires a great adventure.
If you're writing for Adventurers League, consult with the admins before you publish it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. That's so true. And that's a free resource, too, that people can check out, which is great. Which does sort of bring me to, where are some good places if somebody out there is listening and is like, you know what, I think I want to try a Realms adventure. I think I want to try starting a campaign there. What are some good places, interesting places you guys would recommend to start a campaign? And then if you've got any resources or adventures or novels or whatever you want to shout out about that place, you can definitely do that. One of my favorite places to start an adventure is the city of Neverwinter. There's often something interesting happening there. And if you want to set it in the Spell Plague times, the 4th edition book, Neverwinter, which was like sort of a mini campaign setting, I think was a great resource that people could check out and use. Maybe play some Neverwinter Nights if you want to get a sense of the history, and gives you an excuse to play a great video game. So that's sort of my take on it. Ginny, what about you? Where do you think are some good places to start a Realms adventure?
Well, it's fantastic. There's going to be a fantastic new location book coming out. It's actually a campaign book for Chult, which is going to be so much fun to set your campaign in. It's going to have all this information about Chult, and that's a great place to start. But if you don't want to follow the books, I'm a fan of everything in the South, because it's so much different than all the campaigns that most people are running, like on the Sword Coast and everything, because it's bitterly cold up there. So down in Shar or Fae and anything really past that, all of those realms down there are just so full of culture and everything. And Fae is rich in history, and in Shar, of course, as well. I like both of those. If I had time, I would do that.
Yeah, I mean, I have to give one word of caution. If somebody's just starting their first Forgotten Realms campaign, Thay is typically the big bad villain, and it takes a little bit of nuance to really make that at the home of a campaign, I think. But I actually started my last Realms campaign there, so I can't speak too badly against it. I
mean, my characters fit right in there.
guess it all depends on what kind of campaign you want to run, right?
We're just trying to find people we fit in with.
What about you, Jeff? Where do you think are some good places to start a Realms campaign? And there's a wealth of options. Certainly.
Yeah. So, I have my default is if I were talking to somebody who's just getting into the Realms, my default, and maybe this comes back to when I started in the Realms, or maybe it comes back to my upbringing in the Midwest, but my default is start in the Dale Lands, Heartland, Cormier area, because it's a very sort of rural thing, and it's a lot of, hard scrabble folks living off the land and going out and adventuring and saving the day, and there's lots of small towns to save, but also lots of mysterious elven ruins in the nearby forests, and a not too distant, large kingdom in Cormier that you can go and tell that kind of story, and it's wedged between multiple threats. It's a decent ways away from Thay, but their reach can make it out there, and they're not too far away from what used to be the Shaded Enclave, but presumably the Shadowvar are still around causing problems, and the large Anarok Desert is over there. So there's a lot of things sort of around there, but you can kind of get the sort of traditional agrarian, Western European sort of feel, medieval fantasy sort of feel. But at the same time, when I'm running things myself at this point, I typically am looking for parts of the Realms that I don't think are as heavily explored, right? That's why I started my last campaign in Thay, because it's like people don't use Thay as a campaign setting; they use Thay as a villain, right? It's a place that you might attack, but you don't hang out there, you don't live there, largely because you then end up dealing with all kinds of themes like slavery and whatever that sometimes people just don't want to deal with in their free time in their hobby, right? But it's a major component there, right? So, and I would go up further north there and maybe hang out with the Witches of Rashamin, because it's got a very different feel to it. I really like Unther, which is kind of an ancient Sumeria sort of feel. Imeskar is kind of cool, and it's got some interesting things going on. There's a lot of areas, pockets of the world that I think have not been as thoroughly explored as some of the more central locations that I think are really interesting to go to.
Cormier and the Dale Lands there, it's not far from the Moonsea either, so that definitely, the Thayans have gotten all the way up there, influence in Mulmaster and around the Moonsea, so you can pull your favorite villains into that.
You absolutely can, and when I think of that area as a starting place, I'm going back to my start in the Realms, and that was 2nd edition, and the Thayans had some tendrils, but they weren't heavily involved there yet, right? They got pretty heavily involved there by 3rd edition, though.
And it feels like it becomes a bigger and badder presence almost with every edition in some ways. It's been interesting. We haven't seen a 5th edition entire storyline centered around Thay yet, but they keep popping up in various ways.
There was a playtest adventure that right before 5th edition came out that was Thay based.
Yes, a series of them, right?
Yeah.
Dead and Thay is in Tales from the Yawning Portal.
Tales from the Yawning Portal, yeah. Yeah, a massive mega dungeon. How about you, Max? Let's bring it to you. What do you think are some good places to start in the Realms? And I would also say, what do you think are some good novels? Bonus question for you. If people want to start reading the Realms.
I didn't even answer that. I didn't even answer that.
Nice, very nice.
Where do you think they would start to?
I kind of have to agree with Jeff. I mean, call me vanilla, but I really like just the classic agrarian small town starting point. Pick any small town in the Realms, really. I think that's why the starter set works so well, is because it starts in a small community outside of a major city, and it just like what I said at the beginning kind of the show, where you take that small piece of land and then you gradually build it out from there, and you build your story and your characters from there. I think that's why I think the starter set works so well. But in terms of not good novel starting points, don't start with the first novel that was written for the Realms. It's a little too vanilla. But I think definitely the Icewind Dale trilogy is obviously a great place to start. If you enjoy Ed Greenwood's very specific writing style, then you will enjoy his first novel, Spellfire, for sure. If you don't, I wouldn't recommend it. But
and how would you describe that style?
I have heard it said that Ed Greenwood's writing style is better in an audiobook than read.
Ed has said many times that he writes his books in a way that they are meant to be read aloud. So I highly recommend the audiobooks. The audiobooks are fantastic, and I wish he would read them himself. He's got a fantastic voice for it, but he doesn't. Somebody else does it for him. But yeah. Ed has a very I don't know. He goes on and on about things that may not seem particularly relevant to everybody who's reading.
But overall, I think there's any kind of consensus. I think the consensus starting point for a good start in the realms is the Dark Elf trilogy. I think you really couldn't go wrong there at all.
Nice.
Yeah, and I guess it would depend on who I'm talking to, right? I've been a big fan of pointing people to the Brimstone Angel series lately, because that's a whole different on-ramp and attracts, I think has an appeal to a modern audience that the Dark Elf series doesn't always have.
I can't comment on that too much. I will let you know how I feel about the Brimstone Angels in maybe about 10 or 15 years when I get to it.
Oh, you're in for some goodness.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
So I usually point people, one of my favorite ones to start with is the Cleric Quintet, and that's a little earlier. But then the Dark Elf trilogy is definitely pretty close in behind that. Or if I know that they're super into lore, the Elminster series.
That's true. That is definitely true. You know, it's funny you bring up the Cleric Quintet, Ginny. That was my first foray into the realms, was the Cleric Quintet.
I was introduced to the realms as middle school Jeff, and so I read the Avatar trilogy, where gods are thrown down from the planes and are stomping around in the world, and to my middle school mind that was super cool, so I was hooked.
Yeah, definitely. And that if you're listening in middle school, that is a great novel.
Yeah, I think there is probably no, because I got into the realms in middle school as well. I think it's where a lot of us probably first heard of it, but there really is no, and I've recommended the Forgotten Realms novels to just countless elementary and middle school kids. There is no better fantasy series for just, kind of a great, easy read when you're a kid like that. You'll snap to it immediately.
Well, I think that is going to do it for this episode of Tabletop Babble. But before we go, where can people find you, Jeff Greiner?
I am at SQUACH at Squatch on Twitter, and I am also at thetomeshow.com and all the various places that the Tome Show can be found.
Excellent. And where can people find you, Ginny Loveday?
You can find me on Facebook, Ginny Loveday, on Twitter, Ginny Loveday. You can email me, Ginny Loveday. You can also find me at Dragon Con in about a month, and then at Gamehole Con in November. And if you feel like coming to Tennessee in April, I got my own con here, so boom.
What? How do I go to Ginny Con? What is it?
It's Save versus Hunger, and you just come to Knoxville in April.
Oh, it sounds like that is also supporting a good cause.
It is, yes. Yeah, it's a lovely convention for charity, so fun times.
Excellent. Well, thank you for all of the work you do organizing people and introducing new folks to the game. That's huge. And Max, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Reading the Realms. And like I said at the beginning, I do the Forgotten Realms Book Club podcast. You can find us. Oh, and I should also give a shout out to my co-host, Paula. She's right there with me, or going to be right there with me through the many 200 plus Forgotten Realms novels. Where she's awesome. We're on iTunes, we're on Google Play Podcasts, and we're on SoundCloud. And if you want to shoot us an email, we are readingtherealms@gmail.com. I've been trying to encourage more people to write in and give their own kind of mini reviews on the books. I want to make it like a real book club where people are kind of sharing their opinions and thoughts and agreements and disagreements on what we're reading over the course of each show.
Well, I am excited. What book are you reading next?
Next up is actually a pretty big one. We have Spellfire by Ed Greenwood. Ooh. It's his first novel that he wrote and published for the Forgotten Realms, and it is not a short book.
And you're reading the original one because it was later sort of redone and expanded into 3 books.
Right. Yeah. So I do have the original copy, and I know there's an expanded version that came out in the early 2000s, and then it was actually, like you said, there's I think 2 sequels to it. I honestly cannot imagine an expanded version of it, but I will say, and it's something that we're going to touch on in the show, is that he had enough material in reading interviews with him. He says that he had enough material where he wanted to make this like a big old Game of Thrones type of novel, and then he wanted different authors. And his original idea was different authors to take characters from this novel and then spread it out or branch out and write their own series, which you can kind of see that a little bit in reading the book. Just a preview of our next show.
Yeah, no, Ed has said many times that anytime he writes a novel, they cut about 2/3 of it out.
Yeah.
I can't believe it. He once said writing is what you choose to leave out of a story. And I just can't imagine how that is his philosophy. But yes, thank you, Ed Greenwood, for the Realms and for everything you have done. People, thank you for joining me today on Tabletop Babble.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, yay.
Man, that was a great conversation about the Realms. Now, I want to talk to you about reviewing the show on iTunes. It's going to help us grow. Even if you don't listen to the show using iTunes, odds are your podcatcher app uses iTunes algorithms to recommend podcasts to other people. So go create an account and rate us and your other favorite podcasts. If you leave us a 5-star review, I'll read it out loud on the show, like I am about to do right now with Jared Raynor's review. His review is entitled Great Show. Jared Raynor says, amazing show, very informative, very funny, very fun. Great place for RPG info and GM tips too. Thank you so much, Jared Raynor, for reviewing Tabletop Babble. Get on out there and do it yourself. And if you like Tabletop Babble, there's another show on the Don't Split the Podcast Network you might like. The DM's Deep Dive with Mike Shea is a deep dive once a month into a single GM topic with Mike Shea of Sly Flourish, who also wrote a little thing called Sly Flourish's Fantastic Location and Sly Flourish's Fantastic Adventures. Don't know, got just like a little tiny bit southern there. That was weird. Anyway, you want to check this out. It's him talking to another GM. Oh, who have we had on? I don't know. Some cool people like Sean Merwin, Teos Abadia, Enrique Bertrand, the newbie DM. Maybe you've heard of the Dungeon Bastard Tom Lommel. Maybe you've heard of Matthew Mercer of Critical Role. That's right, all kinds of great guests talking to the amazing host, Mike Shea. So definitely check that out. People, if you want to find me, I'm on Twitter at James Introcaso, or you can follow my blog, worldbuilderblog.com. Our theme music, which you're listening to right now, was provided by Battle Bards. Remember, RPGs are like sex. Hey everybody, one more thing I just wanted to tell you about Playground Adventures, a great third-party design company for RPG products with a focus on adventures and activities for children. It's run by husband and wife team Daniel Marshall and BJ Hensley. Playground strives to make adventures that are both fun and educational for the entire family. They've got all kinds of great products lines, like their 12 and up line, Creature Components, which End Zeitgeist says there is narrative potential for years in the system presented here, and we absolutely love it to bits. The book is stellar and deserves a final verdict of 5 stars plus a seal of approval. It's a candidate for End Zeitgeist's top 10 list and receives the EZG Essentials tag. That is high praise from End Zeitgeist. Then they also have some other great lines like their Fun and Facts line, which features an adventure called For the Hive. It's a great way to teach your kids not just about role-playing games, but also about the science of bees. There's some pretty great things in that as well. They also have after-school adventures. After-school adventures are short adventures designed to only take a few hours to complete. Their most popular short adventures are set in Wonderland, which teach first-time gamers how to play over a series of several shorts. The first one can actually be printed out and used as a board game. Playground Adventures is teaching kids how to play Pathfinder, Ponyfinder, 5e, and Hero Kids. And it's not just great for kids. These are super well-written adventures by designers you will recognize, like Stephen Rowe and Dan Dillon. BJ Hensley, and Daniel Marshall. Check them out at playgroundadventures.net. That's playgroundadventures.net.